The rocky, rugged beaches of Northern California look as beautiful as they usually do, except for one thing: the scattering of hundreds of feet of algal vines, dotted with gas-filled bladders, once standing tall from their holdfast rocks to their surface-touching blades. Now limp and tossed loosely in the waves, one may wonder how the beaches became such an unsightly scene. The problem runs deep, both figuratively and literally, as kelp species are decimated by purple sea urchins feasting on their roots. The solution to the problem will be discussed through the following research. First, I will define the key terms related to my research on biodiversity loss resulting from kelp deforestation and why it is integral to California. Secondly, I will outline the existing policies and those currently being implemented to address this issue. Ultimately, I will demonstrate that green market-based solutions are the most effective approach to addressing this problem on a statewide scale, particularly in California. Green markets are economic systems that prioritize sustainability, resource efficiency, and social responsibility, driven by a demand for products and services that are less environmentally harmful. This leads to investments in low-carbon and resource-efficient activities, a shift in business practices towards long-term well-being, and opportunities for companies to build trust with environmentally conscious consumers. Economic incentives by the state and federal government would help reduce the consumption of natural predators of kelp's biggest enemy, the purple sea urchin. Methods such as cap and trade would also help address emissions contributing to warmer waters, which negatively affect kelp forests. Additionally, finding and investing in alternatives to kelp products would help reduce deforestation caused by harvesting. These market-based solutions would help minimize biodiversity loss in kelp ecosystems. Biodiversity loss is one of several planetary boundaries that would be under less stress if California's underwater forests were saved. Planetary boundaries estimate a safe operating space for humanity with respect to the planet's function. They are determined by identifying key Earth processes and quantifying for each process the level that must not be exceeded to avoid irreversible and catastrophic global environmental change. The planetary boundary most affected by kelp deforestation is biodiversity loss. According to the scientific journal Global Environmental Change Advances, humans have increased the rate of species extinction by 100 to 1,000 times the background rates that were typical over Earth's history, and that the boundary of biodiversity loss is clearly being exceeded by at least 1 to 2 orders of magnitude. This indicates an urgent need to radically reduce biodiversity loss rates. This problem began after the Industrial Revolution, when humans dramatically altered the natural world through new methods of resource extraction, production, and transportation. Ramachandra Guha, in Environmentalism, A Global History, explains, "The scale and intensity at which nature was used and abused increased manifold. More humans producing more and consuming more led axiomatically to greater pollution and habitat degradation. Since the Industrial Revolution, humans have continued to encroach on sensitive habitats, hunt at-risk species, and employ lifestyles that exacerbate biodiversity loss through climate change." Kelp is critical to the well-being of California's coastal residents and our state's multi-billion-dollar ocean economy. Kelp forests support important fisheries and offer unparalleled opportunities for diving, kayaking, surfing, and wildlife viewing. This means that many aspects of deforestation affect the state's economy, particularly the coastal areas. Dr. Cynthia Catone, a scientist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, declares, "We are seeing the impact to red urchins and red abalone right away. Those are not subtle. But if we go too long without nursery habitat for rockfish species, we will be seeing those impacts as well." It is evident that kelp forests are critical to preserving these valuable species, and a decrease in their population will result in the loss of millions of dollars. Nur Arafe Dalmau, a postdoctoral scholar in Stanford's Oceans Department, claims that with only 2.8% of kelp forests fully protected in waters, the results suggest that kelp forests closer to continental shores need more protections against fishing impacts. While this solution, backed by environmental movements such as the Help the Kelp program and the Watermen's Alliance, would tackle deforestation, the perspective of indigenous peoples offers an opposing view. Katie Sierry and Pike Spector from the California Ocean Protection Council point out, many coastal tribes rely on kelp for food, medicine, and ceremony. Kelp forests are vitally important ecosystems for several species, including but not limited to commercially, recreationally, and culturally important fish and invertebrates. With California native populations and non-native populations alike dependent on fishing, an all-out ban would not be beneficial, nor would expanding no-take areas, as the environmental groups argue. The connection to the economy demonstrates the increasing need for market-based solutions. Fortunately, state policies and individuals have made commendable efforts to slow the destruction of kelp forests. Several policies are being implemented to address the issue of kelp deforestation. As of October 2020, Governor Newsom of California issued Executive Order N8220, which establishes an ultimate state goal of conserving 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by 2030. The 30 by 30 goal aims to accelerate the conservation of our lands and coastal waters through meeting three objectives: conserving and restoring biodiversity, expanding access to nature, and mitigating and building resilience to climate change. California's 30 by 30 commitment is part of a global effort to increase biodiversity conservation. Additionally, in 2021, the California Ocean Protection Council released an action plan to protect and restore California's kelp forests, collaborating closely with the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. This action plan outlines top priorities for politicians, educational institutions, and other actors to address biodiversity loss across four key focal areas: research and monitoring, policy development, restoration, and community engagement. Both the Ocean Protection Council and the California Department of Fish and Wildlife have filled knowledge gaps, completed critical pilot work, deepened engagement with coastal communities and California Native American tribes, and laid the groundwork for a statewide, ecosystem-based kelp restoration and management plan. In addition to policies being in place and gaining adoption, there are also individuals working to address the problem of kelp deforestation. Deep-sea divers volunteer to smash purple sea urchins that prey on the vulnerable holdfast of the kelp. In Southern California, the two species that eat large adult urchins, spiny lobster and sheephead, are fished. In addition, urchin's primary natural predator, the sunflower sea star, is prone to sea star wasting disease. These causes decimate the populations, allowing the spiny creatures to create urchin barrens. Despite the loss of natural predators, according to a member of the Kelp Forest Alliance, Aaron M. Eager, the biomass of urchins will need to be reduced by 10% to restore pre-barren conditions. Volunteers equipped with rock hammers gladly perpetuate this rebalancing. The effort has resulted in the death of 5.8 million purple urchins in Santa Monica alone since the Bay Foundation has led the project. Despite these efforts, kelp deforestation remains a significant issue today. In addition to state government, environmental movements, and individual efforts to save the kelp forests, green market-based solutions should be a substantial component of the plan to reforest these areas. A sustainable model of market-based solutions to increase biodiversity in kelp forests can be built around two key factors. Karen Whitfield, in Quick Guide to Sustainable Development, outlines these. Firstly, the concept of needs, in particular, the essential needs of the world's poor, to which overriding priority should be given. Secondly, The idea of limitations imposed by the state of technology and social organization on the environment's ability to meet present and future needs. Applying this to kelp deforestation would mean avoiding an all-out ban on kelp fishing and harvesting, which would negatively affect vulnerable coastal populations. Instead, focusing on reducing the consumption of these products by finding alternative sources of conventional goods should be the basis. Andrew Saz, a professor of environmental studies and author, suggests that government subsidies and tax incentives will accelerate the pace of technological innovation. They will continue to be necessary to make alternative goods affordable and to assist consumers with high upfront costs. The limitations imposed by technology and social organization can be overcome through government-funded studies that promote conservation and education about the value of kelp forests. However, this is not the only green market-based solution. In addition, 3 other market-based solutions would help the kelp. Cap and trade is a system that sets a limit on total pollution and allows companies to buy and sell permits to emit, creating an incentive to reduce emissions. This system recognizes the limits of technology and social organization by acknowledging that some emissions are inevitable, while protecting disadvantaged communities from excessive pollution that warms the ocean and supports flourishing sea urchin populations. Secondly, demonstrating the profitability of green solutions can help companies attract private capital, such as tourism. More biodiversity would be attractive to those looking to explore California's oceans, as well as to companies that can provide the equipment to do so. Finally, investments in low-carbon technologies, resource efficiency, and a shift in harmful business practices towards long-term well-being are critical for market-based reforestation. Money invested in preserving these forests' futures ensures the survival of the species that call them home. The rate of biodiversity loss from kelp deforestation in California is a pressing issue that must be addressed as soon as possible. Sierra Inspector observe, specifically in Sonoma and Mendocino counties, more than 95% of bull kelp canopy was lost from 2014 to 2019. In just 5 years, almost all of the kelp has been diminished in these areas by warming sea temperatures and skyrocketing purple urchin populations. If agencies act now, there is a good chance that kelp forests can recover and continue to support and sustain sensitive species. While California's expansive marine protected areas serve as a global model for protecting oceanic biodiversity, they also carry the risk of compromising coastal traditions of harvesting and fishing. It is not feasible to depend on a boycott of kelp products or a ban on fishing the predators of sea urchins. In A History of the World in 7 Cheap Things, it is aptly put, "It is easier for most people to imagine the end of the planet than to imagine the end of capitalism." In conclusion, a green market-based perspective is most useful for addressing kelp deforestation. The implementation of state government policies, environmental groups advocating for marine protected areas, and individual urchin-smashing efforts all contribute to the solution. Still, they have proven insufficient to tip the scales in favor of recovering the massive loss of kelp forests. As a state, California needs to consider economic incentives to restore the biodiversity of its kelp forests. Many green market-based solutions would greatly benefit efforts to conserve these underwater habitats and the species that rely on them. Thank you for listening.